Good morning everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. So welcome to Sanphar Biosecurity program. Today we are all of us about 200, a little bit more than 200 registered people representing 30 countries. So we went overboard last session, we were 20 countries. So welcome and thank you for your presence and time. Our objective, as I mentioned at the kickoff, is to bring biosecurity closer and alive to your operations, right? So therefore, the title Biosecurity Reinforced and hopefully securing business continuity, okay? So the program is made of 9 short webinars, and that is scheduled every month on biosecurity best practices. To achieve that, we have invited the best in class in biosecurity from the veterinary faculty of Ghent University from Belgium, who has been, by the way, nominated top of vet faculty for the last 4 years in a row. The Department of Epidemiology is led by Professor Jeroen Dewulf, who has spent 20 years in prevention disease field with focus on application of biosecurity. He has also published a book on the subject and also on reduction of antibiotic usage. He is assisted by Nele Kakebeker. Since 2017, Nele has been involved around antimicrobial usage reduction too and training to international public. She is part of the BioCheck team. So Nele kicked off the introduction of biosecurity last month, okay? And Andy Vevat, new to the team and contributor to the development of e-learning module of biosecurity. We will have also Dr. Plamen Nikolov, our field specialist in biosecurity from Vilofoss. Dr. Nikolov brings more than 20 years of experience in animal health, nutrition, and biosecurity with loads of experience, field experience worldwide. So he will share the application benefit of a powder disinfectant called Stalosan F as a tool to support your biosecurity plan. Okay, so this is a program. Some logistic point quickly. We are going to spend together about 30 to 45 minutes. So we propose to go through the presentation first. And during the presentation, any burning question can be expressed in the QA feature of the webinar. So it's somewhere on your screen and maybe on the right part. So, and then we will address them at the end of the presentation according to the time allocated. And any missing answer will be posted on Soundfile website shortly. Okay, so right now, the webinar number 2 will state the 5 principles that apply to all animal production and should be the basis of your biosecurity plan. Professor Dewulf will share with us the topics behind. So let's welcome Professor Dewulf. So Professor, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, and thank you for this very kind invitation for being here. I'm gonna share my screen and I hope you'll be able to see my screen now in full presentation modes. So as Harry announced, we are working on in Ghent University. I'm heading the team of the BioCheck team, which is a team doing research and development with regard to biosecurity and animal production. And in this presentation, I have the honor to introduce to you the 5 principles of biosecurity. And these are like principles that we have determined based upon a lot of research, and they are quite basic. You'll see they are quite basic, but nonetheless, it's good to put them online and to list them and think a little bit about this, because if you understand quite good these principles, later on translating these principles, and that's going to be the topic of the future webinars, translating these principles into practical actions at the farm, and whether it's a pig farm or poultry farm or cattle farm, actually all these principles come back to the same ideas. So let's start immediately. And what is my first principle, and maybe the most important principle, when we talk about biosecurity, we really try to separate infectious animals and susceptible animals. And I've tried to show this in this little drawing of pigs. So we have this red pig, which is an infectious pig. It's shedding whatever kind of virus you can think of, or a bacterium or a parasite, any infectious agent is being spread by this pig, and it can be spread to other pigs. And this can go in two ways, either through a direct contact between the infectious and the susceptible animals, or through an indirect contact through some intermediate vector that can transmit the infection. Well, it's quite obvious that this direct contact is the most dangerous contact. The most easiest way to bring in a new disease in your farm is to buy animals. We often say diseases are bought and paid for, and that's unfortunately what happens in reality. You buy new animals, and if they're not fully healthy, the new animals, they also bring new diseases to your farm, and you can have a lot of problems. So this direct contact between infectious animals and susceptible animals, that's where we have to work on to try to avoid that as much as possible. And whenever it's not avoidable, to take the necessary precautionary measures. So direct contact is the most dangerous. But then we have these indirect contacts to trucks, through personnel, people working in the farms, visitors, but also these unwanted animals at your farm, the vermin, can be birds, can be all types of materials, can also be the feed, can be the water. There's a lot of vectors that can transmit pathogens from one animal group to another, or from one farm to another. And also here, we have to take precautionary measures. These transmission routes are maybe lesser efficient. It's lesser efficient through these transmission routes, but on the other hand, they are much more frequent. You will much more frequently have people coming into the stables than you will have new animals coming into the stables. So maybe a little bit less efficient, but more frequent, and therefore at the end they become also dangerous. So the idea is that we actually want to split our farm into a clean area where we have the susceptible animals, and it's maybe a little bit comparable with what we try to do in slaughterhouses as well. We have the clean part, and we have a so-called dirty part, where there might be sources of infections. The outside world, I would say, where we could have sources of infections. We try to build a big wall in between to separate these infectious or potentially infectious animals from the susceptible animals. However, we cannot maintain this wall forever. Sometimes we have to bring in feed to the animals, so we have to bring in water, we have to have people, farm workers going into the stables. And whenever we do that, we have to take measures. And those are these biosecurity measures that we're gonna list later on in the different following webinars. Which measures we have to take, that will depend on the specific herd situation. It will depend on the status of the farm, the type of the farm. So that's going to be later. And often no farms are exactly the same. So it's going to be difficult to list a top 5 list of the best measures. The best measures are those measures that are the best linked to the situation in your specific farm. Another very important thing is that these measures should be performed well and consequent. This means that actually biosecurity is an attitude. It's something in the head. And if you want to apply biosecurity well, you have to make sure that you have a well attitude around biosecurity by the farm workers, by the farm managers. So once you start it, you engage in improving biosecurity, you have to realize that you're also actually engaging in changing the attitude of people. And that's not easy. That takes time. So whenever you start counseling about biosecurity, you start to give advices, be patient and also be persistent. It says that it's not sufficient if I give the advice once. Probably it's not sufficient if I give the advice twice. I have to repeat it over and over again before it really gets installed. And that is because you're really trying to change an attitude of people, and that's not an easy task. Okay, so to introduce my second principle, I just want to give you this table, and I'm not going to go in detail into this table, but what is this table telling us? These are different diseases that are important diseases for swine production, for instance, and we have different routes of transmission. And we have these direct contacts, and you see direct contacts are almost present in every infectious disease. And then we have lots of different types of indirect contacts. And some indirect contacts, like semen, are they not so frequent. For some diseases they are, and others not. Other indirect contacts, like domestic or feral animals, that can be a mechanical vector. It's very frequent. We've used this list, we've created this list, and if you want to see them more in detail, you can find them in the book that we have written on biosecurity, where we have this list for pigs, for poultry, for cattle, for the main diseases, the different transmission routes. So we did a lot of literature research to find all the papers that describe this transmission of diseases. And we use this to then rank the transmission routes. And that's my second principle. Not every transmission route is equally as important. Bringing in live animals, as I said in the beginning, that's about direct contacts. So that's highly dangerous. And therefore, the measures you take to control this, to manage this, are highly important. Bringing in persons that have washed their hands and changed clothes and changed footwear, where there is only like a risk that there is a persistence of a virus in their nose or something, for which often people say you have to be 48 hours free of contact with other pig farms before you're allowed to enter. These are really low risks. And what I very frequently see is that people put the emphasis on the wrong things. They put a lot of emphasis on these low risks, and they forget about these very high risks. So whenever you start implementing biosecurity protocols, start with the high risks. Start here at the live animals, the transport vehicles, the persons, clothing, hand washing, material coming in, and be careful with the ranking here. This is not an exact ranking, depending on which disease you're looking at, which animal species you're looking at. Some positions may change a little bit, but anyway, the idea is not every transmission route is equally important. Start with the high risks and then move forwards towards the low risk. Don't do it the other way around. My third principle is about reducing the general infection pressure. When we think about infections, we should not think in terms of black and white. It's not in terms of either the pathogen is present or the pathogen is absent. Very often, for some pathogens, it's true. African swine fever, it should not be present, it should be absent. That's a black and white story. Classical swine foot and mouth disease, avian influenza, those are black and white. But many other, and mainly bacterial diseases or parasitic diseases, they're always going to be present to a certain extent in our farms, but we have to try to control the infection pressure. It's not so much a problem if streptococci are present on a pig farm. It's a problem if you have too many streptococci, if you have a too high infection pressure above what the animal can cope with, what the immunity system of the animal can cope with. And therefore, we try to reduce the infection pressure by breaking this infection cycle. And that's when we talk about cleaning and disinfection. And the disinfection fits very well in the story of the Stalozan here, where it's really disinfection does not has the aim to fully introduce sterilization. After disinfection, we don't have sterile farms, but we can reduce the infection pressure, same what we do with vaccination, to allow the animals and the immune system of the animals to cope with the remaining pathogens present. To introduce my fourth principle, I ask you a question, and you cannot answer here, you cannot vote here, but think for yourself. Where is biosecurity most important? Is it most important in large herds, in small herds, or is it independent of the herd size? What do you think? What would be for you the answer? Where would it be most important? Well, to answer this, I show you this. And I'm sure you all know about football and about soccer, and you might be a big fan or even a player yourself. Well, then it's easy to understand. If you can choose, which goal would you love to defend? Or asking differently, which goal is the most easiest to defend? Would it be this one or would it be that one? The most easiest to keep the balls out. Is it this small one or is it this very big one? Well, with a farm, it's the same. If you have a small farm, it's more easy to keep the balls out. If you have a very big farm, it's much more difficult. It will take you much more effort. You need to pay much more attention to be able to keep the balls out. Why is that? On big farms, there are more movements, and there's more people coming in, there's more trucks coming in, there's more feed coming in, water coming in. There is this air transmission from one stable to the other, from one compartment to the other. There are more movements of different types. And all of these movements have a certain level of risk. So the bigger it is, the higher your potential risk is, therefore the more measures you have to take. And sometimes people forget that if farmers work through their life, and in the beginning they had a small farm and gradually this farm has grown, and nowadays the farms is 3 or 4 times as big than the small ones, well then you need to make sure that your biosecurity level is growing along. And that's also why today biosecurity is so much more important than it was 20 years ago, because the farms are continuously growing, and therefore we need to be more vigilant with biosecurity. Second point about these very big farms is that whenever something comes in, your consequences can be catastrophic. If you have a small farm and a pathogen comes in, you can be lucky, and it can die out. Whenever you have these very big farms and something comes in, you won't be lucky. It will likely be a catastrophe. So also therefore these big farms need more biosecurity. To come to my fifth and last risk, I ask you again a question. It's maybe a bit more difficult question. It's a calculation question. So maybe take a pen and a pencil, or probably don't need it to think very well. So the question is, assume that a truck that comes into your farm has a risk of bringing in a pathogen of 1 out of 1,000. It's a 0.1% risk that this truck that is coming in, for instance, a truck that comes and delivers feed at a poultry farm, has a risk of bringing in Campylobacter, to say only one thing, a 0.1% risk. And you could argue that a 0.1% risk is a very small risk. I don't matter so much about so small risk, 0.1%. Could be an argument, but then this truck comes every week. Every week the truck comes to bring feed. So we have 52 weeks in a year, and my question is, at the end of the year, how big is the risk of this truck become? Is it 0.5%, is it 5%, or is it 50%? Well, the answer is here. And there is some calculation. I'm not going to dwell on this. If you want to know about it, I can explain, but the answer is 5%, or even a little bit more than 5%. So even a small risk, 0.1% in this example, that you repeat over and over again, becomes a big risk at the end. And that's something often forgotten about in biosecurity. Those things that you do every day, going into the stables, giving feed to your animals, those things that you do every day, they look very, very common, and you don't see the risks of them, although they are, even if they are, have a very small risk, given the fact that you do them every day or maybe multiple times a day, at the end of the day, they're still quite dangerous. So you have, when you think about biosecurity measures, you have to think very carefully also about, and maybe first about those practices that are continuously being repeated on your farm, because those at the end may be the biggest risk or the biggest source of introduction of a certain pathogen. So summing up, what are my 5 principles of biosecurity? The first one is try to separate the infectious and the susceptible animals as much as possible. Try to build a wall in between them. Not every measure is equally important. Focus first on the important measures and then gradually move your way towards the lesser important, but think about your order, your ranking. Reduce your general infection pressure. It's not a black and white story. It's really about you'll never breed animals in a sterile condition, but we have to breed animals in a healthy, hygienic condition. Those are not the same things. Size matters. The bigger your farm becomes, the more important biosecurity is, and frequency matters. And with this, I want to conclude my presentation, and I'm happy to hand over back to Harry. And of course, I'm also very happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dewulf. So thank you for the summary of those 5 principles. So my takeaway and looking at all those 5 points contributing to the strategy, the biosecurity plan to be put in place. So I got something that is compelling to me. And the point is change management, changing attitude. So I would fully agree with you that this is going to be the key success factor of anything that we put in place in the farm. And of course, you know, when you mention and illustrate size matter and frequency, so this rings the bell everywhere, and we will come back on that. So thank you. So let's now turn to Dr. Plamen, Dr. Nikolov, to see how his preferred disinfectant tool Stalosan F mitigate the risk and reduce the infection pressure. So, Plamen.
Very much, Harry, for introducing me, and I'm happy to present some features of Stalosan which can contribute to the biosecurity 5 principles. Yeah. First of all, biosecurity is something very important. It is actually a very important part of animal production's principles, and it is actually the way how to manage the introduction and spreading the disease into and across the farm. Many authorities around the world already adopted the idea that biosecurity can help animal producers to get more sustainable production, and actually that this is the way how to reduce the disease, the production losses, and also to improve the animal health as well as the human health. So those are the 5 principles Professor Dewulf explained in details. I will not focus on them, but I will try to link the Stalosan application to the principles. First one is the separation. Of course, Stalosan can be used efficiently for boot disinfection. We already have this experience. First of it we received from a trial made by University of Minnesota with PRRS virus in pigs. So it was concluded that actually even with a high organic matter on the boots, Stalosan is capable to kill effectively the virus within 3 minutes. On the left-hand side, you can see a picture actually from a farm, a real farm in Turkey, where the farm management adopted the Stalosan disinfection of the boots before entering the farm. What is important also that, for example, here in Europe, we have very cold winter. So during the winter, normally liquid disinfectants are not effective because they freeze. On the other hand, Stalosan does not freeze because it's a powder disinfectant, so it can replace effectively the liquid boot disinfection. So second important principle is the focus on important pathogens. Luckily, Stalosan actually have a very broad spectrum efficacy. Here on this slide, you can see the efficacy of Stalosan against bacteria, fungi, viruses. We also have some experience with parasites and flies and fly larvae. What is good with Stalosan application in this case is actually that it is not so important to focus on more important pathogens because Stalosan can cover a variety of different pathogens from a different origins. We also have plenty of practical experience applying Stalosan against different pathogens, and the result is always really very good. Of course, you have to have in mind that actually Stalosan is capable to control the pathogens which are in the environment. It cannot control the pathogens coming with the feed, water, or airborne pathogens. So this is something very important about Stalosan. Reduction, of course, the most beneficial effect of Stalosan is to reduce the pathogen pressure. Normally, when you introduce the new animals into the farm, you also introduce different pathogens together with the animals. And during the production cycle, you can see a disease outbreak because the pathogens start to multiply. On the other hand, actually applying Stalosan regularly, we can reduce the pathogen pressure and keep the disease out from the farm. The fourth principle is scaling. It is true that actually the large-scale farms or herds are more susceptible or can be more easily affected by different pathogens. Luckily, actually, Stalosan can work as a barrier for transmission of diseases between the herds. But also it is important that Stalosan have additional effect on reducing the ammonia and also humidity, thus improving the animal welfare and most importantly, the health status of the animals. You know that actually ammonia is a quite dangerous toxic gas which can harm the animal health. So reducing the ammonia and also the moisture in the litter, we improve the animal health status. Also the frequency, of course, if you have more frequently visits of people or even delivery of feed or other ingredients to the farm is quite dangerous for the animals to be infected. Luckily, when you have Stalosan in place, it can work as a barrier, as a prevention against accidentally transmission of pathogens. On the left-hand side below, you can see a very old trial made in Denmark, showing that actually 2 buildings equally cleaned and disinfected has much less bacteria count when Stalosan is used 1 week after the inhabited with the animals, comparing to the other building which was not treated with Stalosan. So this shows actually that Stalosan have a long-lasting effect and it can really help to prevent the accidental transmission of pathogens. On the upper side, you can see a practical proof about that. It comes from a poultry farm, breeder poultry farm. And here you can see the number of dead animals because of different diseases with or without Stalosan F. So in practice, actually a regular application of Stalosan is capable to reduce the number of cases, of mortality cases. It is the same with another farm. This is a broiler farm, where actually the exceedance of Clostridia, Salmonella, and Coccidia was significantly reduced because of the presence of Stalosan. Additionally to actually the 5 principle, we have a very important issue of Stalosan, which is the non-selective action. It is capable to kill, but as I mentioned before, bacteria, virus, and fungi. But also it is important that it can kill also the resistant strains of bacteria and coccidia. It also have very good efficacy against different strains of the same virus. For example, against avian influenza virus, we have 3 different trials which are equally effective. Newcastle, IBD are also very important diseases for the animals. Recently, actually, the World Health Organization has focused a lot on IBD virus because it belongs to the same family as coronavirus, COVID-19. So it is very important to spread or separate those 2 viruses belonging to the same family in order to avoid creating a new very dangerous virus. And the 7th feature of Stalosan is actually that because of its broad spectrum efficacy, it improves the poultry production result and profitability of animal production in general. How it happens? On the first place, a reduction of mortality and morbidity, of course, improves the production results in the farm. Improving environmental conditions also gives a very good and comfortable environment for raising the animals. Energy cost reduction is connected with the ventilation and heating of the buildings. When actually Stalosan is capable to reduce the ammonia emissions, of course, it is not necessary to ventilate too often the building and actually afterwards to heat up the building again. So the efficacy on energy cost is really very important. Then it saves litter material because Stalosan can improve the litter quality, and we have plenty of practical experience about that. And the better animal health of the animals actually gives a reduction in medication cost. What is actually important with medication cost, that the most of the medication is actually antibiotics. So in this case, reducing the medications, we also reducing the probability of building up of resistant strains of bacteria. Stalosan is also capable to improve the uniformity of the animals and also improve the laying rate and hatchability with laying hens and broiler breeders. We have very good efficacy result, economical results like return of investments for broilers is 1 to 2 to 1 to 5. And for layers and breeders, actually, because those are expensive animals, the return of investment goes up to 1 to 10, from 1 to 10 to 1 to 17. So that was my presentation about Stalosan and 5 biosecurity principles. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nikolov. I know that you are a little bit frustrated with the 15 minutes that we gave to you to talk about your preferred subject, but we couldn't afford to give you 2 hours, Plamen. So hopefully we will have the opportunity going through that in the following session. So what I love about your presentation, Plamen, is the demonstration. Right, so demonstration and the practicality of your product fitting the biosecurity objective. So well shared with us. So I feel like buying some chicken and trying your product. So it's not time for that. So now is time for you guys. Is your time. So let's do a Q&A. And I would like to start, we have a long list of questions, and I would like to start by you, Professor Dewulf. You have observed challenges of biosecurity, or have you observed changes in biosecurity due to reduction of antimicrobial usage?
Yes, well, thank you very much for this. Yes, well, thank you, Harry, for this very good question. And the answer is yes, we have seen, and mainly because in the past, unfortunately, antibiotics have been used very often to cover up bad management. If you don't have good hygiene, you can often compensate this by adding a bit more antibiotics to your production system, to the feed of the animals, or whatever way of you want to apply it. The more we put pressure on the use of antibiotics, the lesser we are allowed to use so many antibiotics, the more you will see that the need, sorry about that. The more you will see that the need for good biosecurity will increase. So really, those are two stories that are very much linked to each other. If you reduce antibiotics, you need more biosecurity, but you can also turn it around. If you improve biosecurity, you need less antibiotics. And that's also what Plamen just said in his presentation. And we also have done studies at Ghent University to show that indeed, if we at a general level improve the biosecurity at farms, we really need substantially less antibiotics without having a negative impact on the production. We still can have very high, very good production levels with much lesser antibiotics.
Thank you, Professor Dewulf. So very clear answer. I would like to come back to you, Plamen, and one of your first slide number 3, regarding the separation. Is there any evidence for Stalosan F efficacy on the boots disinfectant? So I'm sure that you have all the answer to that question. Plamen?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Harry. Yes, as I mentioned, actually we have a quite good trial made by University of Minnesota against transmission of PRRS virus in United States, and actually the results was compared with a liquid disinfectant based on glutaraldehyde, and the good point was that actually in presence of organic material, Stalosan has showed really very good results, where glutaraldehyde, which tolerate to some degree organic soiling, has not performed very good in this case. But we also have very interesting practical experience with one of the trials we made with my colleagues in Bravo breeders. During the trial, actually, the control house was infected with Pasteurella multocida, which is avian cholera. And it was a situation where the same employees were serving both control and trial house. And we have made a blood test of the Stalosan trial house, and they had not found any Pasteurella infection in the trial house. That means that actually, even if the people can walk from one building to another, the presence of Stalosan F can really help to prevent the transmission of disease from one flock to the other. So thank you.
Thank you, Plamen. Stay with us, Plamen, because we have a ton of questions about your product. So how Stalosan can contribute to biosecurity, reducing ammonia and bedding moisture? So this is, I would say, a classical one for you.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Actually, you know that ammonia is a toxic gas which can harm the animal mucus, especially on the respiratory tract. Even in a very high levels, it can lead to mortality, to lethal exit of the animal. But it is also important that actually ammonia is a neurotoxin which blocks the sense of hunger, the appetite of the animals. So high levels of ammonia will reduce the feed consumption of the animals, and thus it will affect actually the production of the animals. Humidity, yeah, everybody knows that it is not very comfortable when you lay in a humid sheets in your bed. So it is the same with the animals. Most of the animals feel very uncomfortable when it is moist. The resting place doesn't matter if it's pig or poultry or even cattle, and they avoid very moist areas for resting. So adding Stalusa, reducing the moisture in this case, it will give a better comfortability of the animals, and it will lead, of course, to a better production results. Thank you.
Very good, very clear, Dr. Nikolov. So I have a question here. I believe that is for Professor Dewulf, talking about size matter. So we have in Asia huge investment, mega investment in poultry and swine. What would be the area of biosecurity to reinforce in those mega investment, Professor?
Yeah, well, it's a very important issue, and as I mentioned in my principles, as size matters, as farms are growing, biosecurity becomes more important, and really in these very big farms, biosecurity is actually hugely important, and it's very hard to point one component of biosecurity. It's actually the full concept of biosecurity that has become more important. It's both the external biosecurity, avoiding that pathogens come in from outside, but it's also the internal biosecurity, because in these big farms, you also have lots of different age groups of animals, and you have potential spread of pathogens within your farm from one stable or one compartment to another compartment. So any component, and in the next webinars we'll go into detail into these different components, but any component of biosecurity has to be very well maintained in these different parts.
Thank you, Professor Dewulf. So let's take a last question for tonight, and this is coming from a farmer in Indonesia. So, how to manage biosecurity challenge versus shedding virus? So, Plamen, can you give a shot for that one?
Well, this is a question of internal biosecurity. First of all, shedding the virus, I understand that how to reduce the spreading or how to prevent the spreading of the virus. So this is a very important issue of the internal biosecurity, and we will have another webinar especially about internal biosecurity. If I understand correctly, actually, the first part of the question is how to prevent the introduction of disease, and this is again part of biosecurity, but it belongs to external biosecurity. So we'll have another webinar, especially focusing on external biosecurity. So we will go into details about those parts of biosecurity, external and external. Thank you.
So you all understand that we are very excited with this topic. So if we can go to the webinar number 7, 8, 9 right now, it would be the ideal situation for everyone. So that was all for today. So thank you, Professor Dewulf. Thank you, Nikolov, for sharing your knowledge, and hopefully we will have more to share. So thank you, all of you, for attending and coping with again a reminder of the good practices. So We hope to see you again next month, same time. And I will give you rendezvous with Andy Vervaat for the webinar number 3, External Biosecurity Part 1. So we will be looking into the purchasing and transport of animals, quarantine periods, and how to dispose carcasses in a safe way. So this will be our topic next month. So thank you. Bye for now.